Scott MacArthur, longtime Sportsnet 590 host and co-host of a new Blue Jays and baseball podcast with sports media legend Richard Griffin called Exit Philosophy, joins the Locked On Blue Jay podcast today to talk all sorts of topics about Toronto Blue Jay baseball.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Craig Ballard, Locked On Blue Jays, absolutely thrilled to be joined by Scott MacArthur. Scotty Mac, thanks. And Scott, every time you'd think I'd learn what it is by now. I never know. And I want to introduce you to the gentleman to my left, but when it's on the screen, are you on my left? Are you on my right? I haven't been smart enough to figure that part out of it yet. But basically, Scott is the one with the long, luxurious head of hair, and I'm the one with the that's how you'll set us apart here, and probably baseball knowledge as well. That might be something that's going to set us apart also. But we'll get into all of that. But Scott MacArthur, welcome to the Locked On Blue Jay podcast. Thank you for your time today. How are things in your world?
I'm great, Craig, and thank you for the introduction. Although baseball knowledge, we're right together. I should apologize. I'm wearing an old school Chicago Cubs T-shirt on a Locked On Blue Jays podcast. So you caught me in the middle of a wash cycle. So this is what I just pulled out of the drawer today. So now I love my hometown team too, is what I'm saying.
Yes, yeah. Well, ironically. And we'll get into some of this, but Scott, isn't it? I mean, baseball gods. Okay, you got me on this one because it isn't one of the most perfect trades the Blue Jays can make at the deadline. Marcus Stroman and Julian Merryweather from those Cubs, by the way. I mean, just as a side note, wouldn't that? Because Julian Merryweather's killing it for that Cubs bullpen right now. And sure, okay, we'll get into those trades, but I'm just I'm giving you the benefit there, Scott. That no, you've just done some foreshadowing for our trades conversation here with that shirt. That's all that is. It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Well, I'm thinking more Kyle Hendricks because Craig, I'm telling you right now, now if I'm wrong, I'll come back on and just raise my hand and say I'm wrong. But I would peg it at a less than 0% chance that Blue Jays front office and Marcus Stroman ever reunite. Yes. So, well, it's a good idea based on how Marcus has pitched this year. I think it's highly unlikely.
Agreed. And we will definitely get into that. I do want to start, Scott. It's the first question I like to ask my guests here because I just like to get an idea of what you covet and sort of where your head is at as far as what's going to be important to the 2023, most important to the 2023 Toronto Blue Jays. So if I were to tell you, Scott, that I've actually been to the future, I've actually seen and I've come back, believe it or not, the 2023 Toronto Blue Jays, they win the World Series. Now, if I say that to you, Scott, what's your initial instinct? Well, Craig, if that's the case, then X must have gone really well. What's your instinct on that, Scott? What's the X that must have gone really well then?
Well, the X is that this front office did something, or I should use the proper tense, did some things at the trade deadline that are completely outside of this front office's typical approach and personality.
Wow.
Because this team needs a starting pitcher, this team needs at least one flame-throwing reliever, and this team needs a bat. And this team has a bottom half of the a bottom half of the middle third ranked farm system in Major League Baseball entering this season. I believe they were 20th out of 32 in the MLB.com rankings, and we know that there just really isn't anything popping up at the higher levels in terms of being ready to make a major league impact. So I'm not sure how much divesting Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins are going to be willing to do from the farm system to really bolster this team. But if they do go on to win the World Series, it's because they were aggressive at the trade deadline, and those moves helped to take this team further than it appears it will go right now.
So, Scott, let's touch on the trades then. So, you mentioned what you want the Blue Jays to have there. So let's start in that rotation there. So Hyunjin Ryu coming back. That's not potentially going to be enough. It's going to give them that 6-man rotation now. Part of the issue there, I mean, we've seen Gausman and Barrios this season be excellent with the extra day rest, but we've seen Bassett and Kikuchi be just their worst starts were on the extra days rest. So even I'm not even sure that that's a built-in, even if Ryu comes back and is effective. But could that be, we'll start with the rotation, Could that be the arm, Scott, that you're referring to? Or have you already calculated that in and said, nope, Craig, there still needs to be more added to this rotation?
Well, I mean, when I'm imagine here as we sit on a Saturday morning and chat, the morning after Alek Manoah's return starting Detroit, we'll get into that. You could make the argument that Manoah and Ryu stand a chance to be two arms to create a six-man rotation. My hesitation is that there are clearly no promises with Manoah. And with Hyunjin Ryu, he's coming off of Tommy John, as we know. And even though he will be entering the window where the return is possible, there typically is an even longer window before the pitcher, quote, finds his stuff again. So if Ryu... And I know Ryu is not relying on a 98 or 99 mile an hour fastball with precise location. He's not that type of pitcher, never has been. But I think any expectation on Ryu above every sixth day for 4 or 5 innings is unfair to him at this point. So it could possibly be that Hyunjin Ryu is that arm. But I do think you have to factor in the strong likelihood that you're going to need about 12 outs or more from your bullpen on any given day that Ryu starts. So, and again, what's his stuff going to be like? So with both Manoah and Ryu being question marks, that's why I feel they need to go and get another arm for the rotation. They also need help in the bullpen, in my opinion, but they need... That's why I think they need help in the rotation as well.
And we'll get to the bullpen in a second. Just want to stay in the rotation for a moment here. Now, what do you see, Scott, from Alek Manoah the rest of the season as far as the need from a Toronto Blue Jays standpoint? And what I mean is I'm still very in the camp that we're going to see Alek Manoah, the Alek Manoah that we know and love from 2021 and 2022. I'm a firm believer that we still see that pitcher, but I'm acknowledging it might be a process to get to that point. So what do you think the Blue Jays need out of Manoah? Do they need him to, hey, Craig, they need him back to that 1 or that 2 ASAP, or with the veterans in this rotation right now, and to your point, especially if a move's going to be made at the trade deadline to add somebody, can the 2023 Toronto Blue Jays still be, still accomplish what their high end to accomplish is, if Alek Manoah for the rest of this season is more like a 3 or a 4, more like that guy like you just described with Ryu, where you can run him out there every 5th, 6th day, but no, you're going to get 5 and you're going to be happy if you get 6. Whereas Alek Manoah, right? We're looking for that 7 or that 8 innings. So what do you see? Not just from Manoah, but from what do you think the Blue Jays need from this guy going forward?
Well, the Blue Jays need him to go out there every 5th or 6th day on schedule and not implode and kill their bullpen. So if Alek Manoah returns to last season's form, that is the cherry on top of the whipped cream, on top of the Kawartha sundae, right? Like that would be heavenly. Because you really do already have an ace in Kevin Gausman. So if you ended up with a 1-2 punch where both guys were legitimate aces, and then you had Barrios and Bassett in whatever order you want to put them falling in underneath, all of a sudden it looks quite nice. That would be the best case scenario. But I really think all they need from Manoah is him going out there on his start day and getting them into the middle of the game with a chance to win. Now, his bar, in terms of expectations, is excruciatingly high because of how well he pitched both in 21 after his call-up in late May and last year where he finished top 3 in the Cy Young voting. But what they really need is somebody who's not going to destroy their bullpen every 5th day, and that's where they got to with Manoah in early June when they finally had to pull the plug. Because it just, if you're going out there every 5th day and Kikuchiing, 5, maybe 6, you've given up 2 or 3 bombs, but they're of the solo or 2-run home run variety, and the game is 4-2 for you or for the other team. You got a chance to win, and your starting pitcher, Kikuchi, in the example I'm offering here, has given you that chance to win the ball game. But when it's 8-0 and you've gotten 4 outs and John Schneider's coming out with the hook in the second inning, and you need 24 outs or whatever, my math is off a little bit, but you need 20 plus outs from a series of relievers, and you don't have an off day from here to Kingdom Come, it's not functional. And so, with Manoah, look, I do believe his return in Detroit is an indictment on the front office. I've been hammering them for this. They got no depth. They've got no depth on the pitching staff. And I would even argue they really haven't drafted and developed a player of significance positional wise, not named Vladdy, although that was an Alek signing, but he was developed by this front office, to be fair, and Bo Bichette. So where's the development with everything we hear about what's gone on in Dunedin and all of that? Manoah's back because they can't keep running the four other starters ragged, and they don't have any other alternative at this point. If Manoah comes back and succeeds, and clearly he did, he got the first 2 outs in the first inning last night and then looked a little sketchy, but escaped and then settled in very nicely. If he comes back and continues to perform well, and we know he will face better competition than the Detroit Tigers,
yes,
then that's great. But the fact he has returned as quickly as he has, given what he went through, I think is more of a reflection of the lack of depth in the organization than it is necessarily the right timing. But if Alek comes back and pitches well every time out, then that shuts me up and I won't speak of it again.
More with Scott MacArthur in just a moment here. We're about to get into Dalton Varsho and the bullpen. But first, I wanted to talk about the fact that buying tickets to your favorite sport events, or any events, really, it shouldn't be stressful. GameTime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, theater, you name it, near you. Killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped about the fun you're going to have. In my own personal experience, I've used it many times this season, and everydayers will know I've often talked about the fact that I don't like going to the Toronto Blue Jay games, but that has changed in 2023. I like the renovations a lot. Yes, absolutely. But the GameTime app just makes it so easy to get the tickets. It's literally 2 clicks and you're done. The tickets come right to your phone, so you're not fumbling around. When you get there, you show your phone to the ticket taker and you enjoy your event. It is that easy. And for somebody like me, I need it to be that easy. That's why I've used the GameTime app several times and will continue to do so. The GameTime guarantee is something I really appreciate as well, and that means you're always going to get the best price, because if you find tickets in the same section and same row for less, then GameTime is going to credit you 110% of the difference. I mean, it's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Snag tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's going to get you $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, Scott and I get into some Dalton Varsho and a whole lot of bullpen talk. Where are you on Dalton Varsho, Scott?
I'm not anywhere because I'm not surprised. I mean, if you look at his splits in Arizona last year, he couldn't hit left-handers, and he's a left-handed hitter.
True.
So then he becomes a platoon guy. And if you look at his OPS against righties last year, you see that it's slightly north of 800, but a lot of it's slug. I think he had like a 317 OBP and a 484 slug against right-handed pitchers last year. So there's a lot of power against right-handers that accounts for that OPS and not a whole lot of on base. So I don't know what the reasonable expectation of Dalton Varsho was offensively. It's inarguable between Varsho and Kiermaier that the outfield defense has significantly improved, especially when it comes to tracking fly balls and covering gaps and down the line and just plugging the holes that seem to spring up all the time last year. So young player, as you said, controllable, not a free agent for another 3 seasons, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 4, but I think it's 3. So room for growth, without question, offensively. A good ball player who, on a good team, is hitting 6 or 7. It would be my assessment of it. And if he gets on a bit of a heater and he's got 8 home runs in a month against right-handed pitchers, then maybe against right-handed starters you bump him up to cleanup or 5 or whatever. But he's he's not a top third of the order guy, and is what he is. Until he shows us he can get on base 34% of the time on the whole, he can't get on base 34% of the time on the whole. So that shouldn't be our expectation until he starts to show it consistently.
Craig Ballard, Locked On Blue Jays, here with Scott MacArthur. Scott, we were talking earlier about the bullpen, and you're mentioning you definitely want to see some upgrades there at the trade deadline. So Scott, so I guess you're not of the opinion that the improvements to the bullpen could be in-house, like with Zach Pop returning, a Chad Green.
Yeah,
Scott, I'm still dreaming about Ricky Tiedemann joining this bullpen. I realize that's far-fetched, and hey, Craig, keep dreaming, right? But I still haven't abandoned that hope anyway. So Scott, I do wonder if improvements to the bullpen can be in-house. Trevor Richards now back in that bullpen as well. What are you seeing in this bullpen that's making you say, well, you know what, Craig, even with all that said, there is definitely another. And by the way, we shouted out Pat Gillick earlier. Scott, can we take a quick second and shout out Tim Meza? Tim Meza has been outstanding this season for the Toronto Blue Jays, by the way. But go ahead, Scott. Ball is yours. Where are you on the bullpen? What are you thinking? Tim
Meza has been fantastic, and I am a participant in a computer sim league that Mike Wilner has put together with a bunch of people. And so we play every year based on the previous year's statistics. And Tim Meza is in my bullpen. So every time he goes out there and has a 3-up, 3-down inning, I'm looking at him as one of my true leverage guys in our 2024 Geek League, as we call it, Geek League season next year. So I'm pretty excited about that. I would like to see. I'm big on Swanson, but he wasn't available, as we found out. He wasn't available in Chicago for the doubleheader because he's wiped. I mean, man. They're using these guys and have had to use these guys a lot. I think Swanson's had a generally terrific season. Jordan Romano leads the league in saves, and I won't take that away from him. And I do not have my bulletproof vest here because I don't own one. And I know he's from Markham, and I know we rally around our good local and Canadian guys, and I am not crapping on Jordan Romano here, but I don't have the Tom Hankey, Dwayne Ward vibes when he takes the mound. I don't. And I'm not I text people who have been in the game or who remain in the game and around the game to check in to see if I'm just crazy. And they're like, he's a good closer. But I understand why you feel the way that you do. And sometimes he just hangs a slider. Or sometimes there's a dick shot fastball there that, that goes a long way off the bat. And so, we can debate this, but Jordan Romano with a 1-run lead nails down to the cuticle. That's just how it's going to be for me. I'm not taking anything away from him. I think he's a wonderful story. Spent all those years in the minors, Rule 5, brought back, suddenly dominant. It's a great story. Local kid, always rooting for him. But I just think another elite arm. Now, if Chad Green comes in as a higher leverage guy, and helps to backfill there. Tim Meza, as you said, has been excellent. Nate Pearson throws the crap out of the ball. There are 1 or 2 too many 395-foot fly ball outs for my comfort level. But there's no denying the stuff. I just think you can't have enough.
Okay.
And if you have assessed this team to be a legitimate World Series contender, and really it's Mark Shapiro's and Ross Atkinson's opinions who matter here more than yours or mine or anybody else's, because they're the ones who are eventually going to either make moves or not. But if you have assessed this team as a legitimate World Series contender, and as the implosion against Seattle in game 2 last year would remind you, you can never have enough, and you go get another guy who throws 98, 99, or 100. And I know it's hard to do, and it's easier said than done, and the demand always outweighs the supply. But I'm not making $6 or whatever the hell $1 million a year to run this team. Mark Shapiro, Ross Atkins are getting paid well to figure out how to do this. Go do it.
So, Scott, you're looking big game hunting then. So for me at the trade deadline, I'm thinking it's going to be a little bit more around the edges, and that's because of something you mentioned earlier. I just can't see with the third wild card. I mean, almost everybody makes the playoffs these days, right? Well, and everybody thinks they're in contention. So this is going to be a seller's market at the trade deadline, and I just can't see the Blue Jays having all kinds of players that other teams covet and are interested in. I really, really, really hoped that Biggio and Espinal would do well to start the season so that they could be guys. And they've both been good lately, but we're still in a case where we have to find another organization that still covets Biggio, that still believes in Biggio. There's something in there we can fix, maybe similar with Espinal. So for me, Scott, you're talking about moving on, not moving on, but having another closer there instead of Romano. That's big game hunting. That's for me, Scott. That's got to involve Ricky Tiedemann. So now I'm getting very nervous. So what are you thinking at the trade deadline? Who are you thinking other teams might covet on this roster in these minors?
Yeah, well, I mean, the guys in the minor leagues who I think would have value are probably, or the highest value, of course, are the guys the Jays are least likely to want to part with, and in no small part because they just don't have a lot of top-end prospects at this point, and the people that they're really counting on down the road are still in the lower-ish levels of the minor leagues. And we've also had, in terms of guys they could acquire, we've had some unexpected things happen. Like suddenly the Cincinnati Reds are a good team.
Jeez.
Right? Suddenly the New York Mets aren't. Suddenly the Arizona Diamondbacks, and I love it because Torey Lovullo survived. Usually a manager who goes up with a team, falls down with a team, gets chopped off at the fall. But they kept him around, and now they're on the upswing again. So good for Torey Lovullo, who was a very popular coach when he was here in Toronto, longtime baseball guy. And so suddenly Arizona's good. Suddenly the St. Louis Cardinals are absolutely horrible. So, it makes for an interesting, and can the St. Louis Cardinals admit to themselves that it's over? But then they're playing in a crappy division. So maybe it's not over for them. And do you want to take a run at a guy like Jordan Hicks? I don't know. The guy throws 103 miles per hour, but he's got as much of a likelihood of Rick Ankeeling the thing to the backstop as he does putting it where the catcher sets his mitt. So, I just think you got to get creative. I don't know if you replace Jordan Romano as the closer, but I think you want to strengthen what's around him so that you're not running Eric Swanson into the ground. And, Tim Mesa is a guy who I think John Schneider and the 19 people with binders who advised John Schneider have done a really good job of finding places where Mesa can get his groove. And now all of a sudden we're not hearing about the Mesa windows. And we need to find a place where Mesa can face two left-handed hitters in a three-man set. It's kind of like Tim Mesa's good now, so let's just throw him out there and leverage and trust that he's going to succeed, and he often does. So yeah, if it all comes internal, but again, Craig, like the Chad Greens and stuff, Green's a very good reliever, but he's coming off a very serious injury. So can you trust between Manoah and Ryu and Chad Green, two of those three coming off significant injuries, the other coming off a significant mental, and I would argue as well, physical reset in season? Can you count on those guys being the people to account for the hole filling that on the pitching staff. And because I would also argue they need another bat.
More with Scott MacArthur in just a moment as we're going to finish the show deep diving the workload we've seen so far from the Toronto Blue Jay bullpen. Now, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes in life, we're faced with tough choices, and the path forward isn't always clear. Whether you're dealing with decisions around career, relationships, you name it, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life so you can move forward with confidence and excitement. Trusting yourself to make decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, the easier it gets. Therapy can help you with learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, and it empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for people who've experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonmlb today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonmlb. And to your point, Scott, you talk about Erik Swanson not even available for that entire doubleheader. I mean, he's at 41 appearances. His career high is 57. I mean, holy moly. And
right. And how many of those, Craig, have been come in with 2 outs, get the last hitter in an inning, and then not return?
Mm-hmm.
Probably 0.
Mm-hmm.
If there's 1, I'll stand corrected, or 2, but I don't recall that.
Yeah, no, they're looking for him to, if they need a big out in the 7th, and then carry the day in the 8th as well. Yeah, he's getting
Tim Meza has way more appearances than innings pitched, so he's not averaging an inning per appearance because they found ways to earlier in the season when they were still unsure about where Meza was. They found ways to effectively use him. That may change in the second half if he keeps pitching this well. But Erik Swanson is like, he's out there for 3 or 4 outs, right? So, and that's why relievers year over year are so. Anytime you have a Mariano Rivera who's just elite every year, that's the outlier.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
I mean, Meza. It's funny. I go to Baseball Reference just to remind myself something. Meza had a better year last year, not a great year, but a better year last year than it felt. But he struggled badly against right-handed hitters and gave up a few bombs at untimely times and all that. And so, you know, it's hard to get a read on relievers sometimes and where exactly they are eye test versus what the statistics actually say.
Yeah, it's so volatile, the back of the bullpen. The example I use, Scott, is Brett Cecil, former Blue Jay. He was the worst reliever you've ever seen in your life. Then the very next season, he set every reliever record there is. He was the greatest thing ever. St. Louis gives him that big contract. He's right back to being the worst thing you've ever seen. It's volatile. The back of that bullpen, there's just no doubt about it. And just as a follow-up to what Scott and I were talking about there about the workload that we've seen from this bullpen, because I am excited to get a Zach Pop back in the mix, to get a Chad Green back in the mix. I still haven't given up my hope that Ricky Tiedemann can come back in the mix, but certainly 2, not all 3, but probably 2 of those guys do need to come back and work out for the Blue Jays, or I'm right with Scott. They're going to need to add an arm at the trade deadline. And I say that not because I've been unhappy. I've been very pleased with the bullpen in the first half, prior to the All-Star break. But when you really get into the nitty-gritty, I mean, Erik Swanson, his career high was last season, 57 appearances. A dozen of those were less than 1 inning. Scott and I were talking about how Erik Swanson doesn't seem to come in for the 1 or 2 batters. The Jays are asking him to go at least 1 inning, if not get them 4 or 5 outs, more often than not, but for sure at least a 1 inning. So a dozen of his 57 appearances last season, Seattle asked him to go less than an inning. He's already at 42 appearances for the Blue Jays so far this season. As we're in the All-Star break, only 3 of those 42, the Blue Jays have asked him to go less than 1 inning of work. So Erik Swanson, and if you look at the splits, his first 20 appearances versus his most recent 22 appearances, wow. There could well be some signs of fatigue setting in. So again, looking for some depth in this bullpen. Tim Meza on 41 appearances already. I talk about Swanson at 42. Meza's at 41. I mean, he's on pace for a career high. So you have Nate Pearson, who's already at his career high for appearances. You have Erik Swanson on pace for his career high in appearances. You have Tim Meza on pace for his career high in appearances. You have Jordan Romano on pace for his career high in appearances. Even Yimi Garcia I know Jimmy Garcia, right? And he used to insist it was Jimmy. Now I think he insists it's Jimmy. So even Jimmy Garcia is on pace for a career high in appearances. So really, I mean, Zach Pop, Chad Green, please come back healthy and effective. I would love to see Ricky Tiedemann as part of this bullpen as well. But as Scott and I were looking at and talking about, what sort of relief pitcher can the Blue Jays bring in, because the asking prices are going to be sky high, and our team's going to be super excited about what the Toronto Blue Jay organization currently has to offer. Well, that's a wrap for Tuesday's Locked On Blue Jay podcast. More with Scott MacArthur coming up later on this week. And Steve Hunter from Blue Jays Fan UK joins us this week. I mean, the life of a Blue Jay fan across the pond is, we're fans, like, I don't want to take anything away from our fandom, but wow, they're fans all the way down to having to plan their life around. These games start at midnight, 2 a.m. I mean, these guys are every bit as hardcore as we are as fans. We have a great conversation with Steve to look forward to this week. Keep it locked on the Locked On Podcast Network and check out Sully hosting Locked On MLB. Enjoy tonight's All-Star game. We usually say go Jays go. I mean, just, go Jays go as far as representing the Blue Jays really well tonight in the All-Star game. We can certainly say that. And we'll talk tomorrow.